The noble thirst won. The winding path before Black Nail ran through the tall trees, past the bushes at their edge, and out into the midday sunlight. The hobgoblin followed the trail and stepped out onto the top of a hill. Immediately, he was confronted by the sight of a valley surrounded by forested hills. Within the valley lay a crude-looking village. It had been a long journey, but Black Nail had finally gotten back from Dagger Point. From atop the hill, Black Nail could see over the settlement's walls. He frowned thoughtfully. What he saw within them surprised him a little. The large clearing was still full of rocky hills, but the amount of buildings around them had more than doubled. Black smoke rose up into the sky from several chimneys. The older longhouses made from woven branches and bark were still standing, but now there were plenty of buildings made from mud bricks and large felled logs. There were only a few areas within the walls left clear of construction, but an odd sight caught Black Nail's eye. There was a crater where a longhouse had used to be. Had there been an accident? One lost building wouldn't be so bad. Black Nail had actually been expecting to find half of the place on fire when he got back. Looking over a bit, Black Nail saw that the forest outside the settlement had also been pushed back almost 100 feet. A lot of that ground was still filled with tree stumps, but some of the soil looked like it had been torn up and cleared of rocks and plants. Black Nail knew the trees had probably been cut down for firewood, but he wasn't sure why the ground had been cleared. Maybe Gob was just trying to keep the goblins busy? How many goblins live here now? Black Nail muttered to himself. Feeding them all might be difficult come winter, and he knew a lot of the little green pests were free riding of all his hard work, even if it was hard to find out which goblins those were. They all claimed to be hard workers. Scamp interrupted Black Nail's thoughts. Dunno. Lots. The other hobgoblin walked up beside Black Nail and peered over at the settlement. There were several other hobgoblins behind him. I wasn't asking you, Black Nail replied dismissively as he began walking down the hill. After dropping off Geralt and the others at shelter, Black Nail had met up with the hobgoblins that had been following them in secret and headed here. Most of the hobgoblins were carrying piles of tools such as axes or shovels. A lot of gear had been dropped off at shelter, but Black Nail had kept some for his own use. In particular, the steel-headed axes would be useful for chopping down trees in order to build and provide firewood. Stone axes just weren't anywhere near as good. And now I'm back here in this dirty death trap, Elias moaned from the back of the group. He was carrying a particularly large heap of tools. Since Elias was known as a thief and a traitor, he had stayed with the hobgoblins instead of traveling with the humans, although Black Nail hadn't actually given him any other option. You're safer here than practically anywhere else, Black Nail told him. There is a difference between living and surviving. One of them has ale and women. Black Nail smirked at Elias. You can't have either if you're dead, but don't worry, soon we will be having lots of fun. Elias sighed despondently, but Avorlus spoke up. This is where your mage is? The young fool is right, it doesn't look like much. Although I don't know what I was expecting. Black Nail scowled at the mage's words. He was rather proud of the goblin settlement. It had taken a lot of hard work to create it out in the forest. Avorlus was just being miserable. He had journeyed with Geralt and the others to shelter, but he had demanded to go with Black Nail and meet his mage at the goblin settlement right away, even though the long journey from Dagger Point had tired his old body out. On the way here, Avorlus had found out that the mage he was looking for was a hobgoblin, but he still wanted the knowledge Black Nail said he had. There was activity at the gate they were walking towards, so Black Nail turned to observe it. Several goblins ran off as two hobgoblins stepped forward with raised spears. Black Nail didn't recognize either of them. Stop. Who are you? One of them yelled towards the approaching hobgoblins. I'm Black Nail, your leader, Black Nail shouted back in an annoyed tone. They should really know this already. He was important. Really? One of the guards replied uncertainly. Black Nail glared at him. Yes. He's Black Nail all right, Scamp added helpfully. There was a moment of silence from the guards as they turned to regard each other. I thought Gob made him up, one of them remarked to the other quietly. Don't be an idiot. I always knew he was real, his companion replied before turning toward Black Nail. You may come in, he announced. Black Nail huffed as he walked past the guards. I know I can come in. I'm the leader and we outnumber you. The targets of his ire didn't respond. They wisely kept silent and got out of the way. The wall in front of Black Nail was made from a row of long wooden stakes that rose up from the earth. They were tied together for extra strength and their tips had been sharpened to make them hard to climb or jump over. The gate through them was just a gap for people to walk through, which Black Nail's group promptly did. Let's go see Gob, Black Nail informed his minions as he looked around the settlement. He wanted backup in case something unexpected happened. After a few seconds, Black Nail spotted Gob's old home and began walking over to it. It was one of the earliest branch longhouses, and a quick inspection revealed no sign of Gob, just half a dozen goblins that quickly ran off. Black Nail was just about to check the next longhouse when Gob appeared with two other hobgoblins behind him. Gob was the first hobgoblin that had joined Black Nail and he had been left in charge of the settlement while Black Nail was gone. Gob was very loyal but Black Nail was still a little nervous. He had been gone for a long time, and hobgoblins weren't known for their patience or subservience. Welcome back, Great One. Gob exclaimed joyfully as he bowed his head. Black Nail's posture relaxed a little. Gob sounded very sincere. It was hard for a hobgoblin to fake happiness like that. You seem to have done an alright job here in my absence. You commanded me to keep the food stores full and make sure everyone behaved, so I have done so, Lord. Are you feeding all these goblins? Black Nail asked. On the way in they had passed what must have been 100 goblins. Yes, many of them work in the human fields for food, and I have started a few plantings of my own outside the walls. I brought some tools that will help you with that, Black Nail replied. Did you run into any problems while I was gone? Gob shook his head. There were a few young hobgoblins that refused to listen to your teachings, so I killed them. You seem to have left plenty alive, Black Nail observed. He had seen quite a few new faces as he'd strolled through the settlement. Black Nail wasn't sure he really wanted so many hobgoblin minions. They were hard to control. You are a great leader, the more minions you have the higher your own stature. True, Black Nail mused aloud. He hadn't really considered it that way before. Gob was making a fair amount of sense, but Black Nail was curious about one thing. What happened to the longhouse over there? Great one. I lack your power and good looks, so several hobgoblins began planning against you while you were gone. They thought themselves better than you, so I had him blow their house up while they were sleeping. Don't worry. I probably would have done the same thing. That sounds like it was fun, Black Nail admitted with a smile. Thank you, Master. May I ask who this new person is? Gob asked as he looked toward Avorlus. A mage that can make some important stuff for me. Gob frowned. He still has his clothes. Avorlus sputtered loudly and gave Black Nail an irritated look. The hobgoblin sighed. He's not a prisoner, Black Nail quickly said before leaning in close to Gob and whispering. But make sure he doesn't leave the camp without permission. Black Nail then coughed and stepped back. I also have a bunch of tools I brought from the human city, find somewhere safe to put them. I don't want any stupid goblins stealing them. Rolly will take care of that. He has done a good job being in charge of the food storage, Gob replied as he motioned toward a fat hobgoblin standing beside him. Make sure they are kept clean and ready for use. I don't want them getting dull or rusty, Black Nail added. Rolly was one of the first local hobgoblins that had transformed. He had looked a little chubby even then, and he'd only grown thicker since. He wasn't quite human fat, but he had a noticeable pot belly and was the whitest-looking hobgoblin Black Nail had ever seen. Still, Rolly had always struck Black Nail as clever enough to stay out of trouble, so he probably wasn't a bad choice to look after the supplies, even if he did eat more than his share of them. Yes, boss. I will keep them safe and ready for use, Rolly replied with a sloppy salute. When Black Nail nodded back, he then led the hobgoblins that were carrying gear off deeper into the camp. Since that seems like everything important, I'm going to go take a nap, Black Nail said as he turned to look off towards where his cave lay. It had been a while since he had slept in his bed here and he wanted to get reacquainted with it. Gob frowned. I wouldn't dare tell you what to do, but I was planning on holding a meeting for all the hobgoblins. Too many of them have never seen their glorious leader, and that is unacceptable. All right, I'm going to nap for a bit. Get me when you are ready. Gob winced. Sorry, boss. I got excited and already sent out minions to gather everyone. They should be ready in just a few minutes. Fine, let's get it over with then, Black Nail groaned. It was probably a good idea to make sure everyone knew he was in charge, especially if it only took a few minutes. I think I'd like to skip this little event and meet with your mage already. I want to see if this hobgoblin really can make mana stones. If he does, then this little jaunt won't have been a complete waste of my time. Since there was no reason to keep Avorlus around, Black Nail led him and the hobgoblins on a detour toward Imp's hut. Once there, Imp began a demonstration of his knowledge that involved several glass beakers and a lot of incomprehensible muttering. Avorlus frowned at the primitive surroundings and scavenged tools, but he quickly became enraptured by what Imp was saying and doing. Everyone else found staring at boiling liquids mind-numbingly boring, so they stepped outside. Black Nail was just about to suggest going to the meeting, when an unfamiliar hobgoblin walked over to him and waved in greeting. He was tall and thin with an unhealthy gray cast to his skin. His dark hair was very short and fuzzy, like it had been cut or burned off and only recently regrown. Who are you? Black Nail asked in confusion. Most hobgoblins didn't wave. That was a human thing. I'm Farrer, the hobgoblin replied in an equally perplexed tone as he quickly dropped his hand and stopped waving. Oh, right. Black Nail saw the resemblance now, although it was hard to recognize him since he wasn't standing next to a fire. Have you come to pay respects to your great leader? Farrer looked uncertain. Yes. Congratulations on doing all the wonderful things that you did while you were gone to the place you went. Thank you, congratulations on becoming a hobgoblin. Farrer tapped the side of his head. The better thoughts make it easier to figure out how to burn things. Probably, Black Nail replied. Is that everything you wanted? I'm a little busy right now. I wanted to ask you for something, boss. What? Black Nail asked. He was willing to bet it had something to do with fire. There are secrets that the humans have that I want. Ask the villagers. They are supposed to share that sort of stuff with us now. They don't know. I need to learn from other humans that live somewhere else. What are we talking about? Black Nail asked as he frowned in puzzlement. Making the shiny metals. My fire doesn't burn them enough. The humans here only know how to repair metal things. None of them can take iron from the ground and make new tools out of them. Why do you want to do that? It's easy enough to take metal things from humans, Black Nail replied. The world was full of easily hunted humans with useful items. Farrer's eyes seemed to glow with fervor. I don't want to take. I want to make a furnace that will melt iron and cleanse it. It will be bigger and hotter than any of the fires I have made yet, but I will tame its flames and create so many wonderful new things with its power. I'll keep an eye out for such a human, Black Nail replied carefully, before taking a step back. Farrer was a very useful minion, if a little intense at times. Even as a goblin he'd been one of the most productive of Black Nail's subordinates. Almost all the pottery was made under his direction and he was the best at crafting it, so keeping him happy would be worth a little effort. Building a new furnace to smelt iron would also keep him busy and hopefully out of trouble. Now that Farrer was done talking, Gob walked up and addressed Black Nail. Most your minions should have gathered by now. Let's go then. I'm getting tired, Black Nail replied with yawn. With a respectful nod, Gob led Black Nail over to the largest open space inside the settlement. It was usually used for training, but someone had built a raised platform over on one side of it. To get to it the group had to pass by a crowd. Quite a few hobgoblins and goblins had gathered for the meeting. There looked to be almost 100 hobgoblins and countless goblins. Once he reached the top of the podium, Black Nail took a second to look down at them. It was a little intimidating. There were so many eyes on him, and the idea of there being 100 hobgoblins in one place was unreal. The idea that he would want to be anywhere near them was even weirder. Why weren't they killing each other? They seem well behaved, Black Nail remarked uncertainly to Gob. Gob beamed proudly back. I've been training them the way you taught me, and only those that learn are allowed to live. They practice with swords and to control their rage and hunger almost every day. Your ideas did this, wise one. Your genius knows no bounds. We are a mighty tribe now. Black Nail frowned as he looked over the hobgoblins. Where do they all live? Every longhouse has a small group of hobs that control it, Gob explained. The strongest rules the home and all the goblins that live there. Each longhouse is like a small tribe within a tribe, except they all serve their glorious leader, you. Black Nail still had a hard time seeing them all getting along. Even disciplined hobgoblins would find reasons to brawl. Do they fight or steal from each other much? Stealing from other longhouses is not allowed, by your orders. You have told me many times that stealing is bad, so I killed the thieves for you. Now they only steal small things and are very sneaky about it. Yes, I am very smart for thinking of that. What about fighting? Sometimes they fight, but they know what is allowed and what isn't, only small murders not big ones. Black Nail nodded along thoughtfully. Ah, that makes sense. Since Black Nail had no more questions, Gob stepped up to the edge of the platform and raised his arms. From somewhere off to the side someone blew a horn. The deep echoing sound rolled over the green crowd, and they all fell silent and looked towards the stage. Black Nail stared back. What was this now? Listen, brothers and sisters. Our magnificent chieftain has returned from his battle with our enemies. He has brought many spoils and bathed in the blood of the fallen. We are victorious. All praise to Black Nail the undefeated. The gathered goblins and hobgoblins immediately roared their approval by screaming at the top of their lungs. Their raised voices seemed to tear the air and explode out into the forest. Black Nail had to catch his balance and shake off the effect of the screaming. It felt like his skull was vibrating. When Gob had mentioned a meeting, Black Nail had been picturing something smaller and a lot less noisy. Gob then lowered his arms and stepped out of the way. The eyes of the crowd instantly all focused on Black Nail. He gulped and froze for a second. He didn't know what to say, and then he remembered that his audience were hobgoblins. He was a hobgoblin, so he knew them, even if he didn't like them. You just had to tell them what they wanted to hear. Black Nail stepped forward and yelled at the crowd. Once we were weak and small. Once we feared the jaws of trolls and the claws of harpies, but no longer. I have slain these beasts. Follow me and you will never fear anything in the forest ever again. Serve me and food will be plentiful and your nights warm. You who stand before me are the strongest and the smartest. Serve me and we shall take the world as our own. Blood will flow and the hunt will last forever. I cannot be beaten. There was another frenzy of excited screaming from the mob. Hobgoblins were jumping up into the air and waving their arms. Even the goblins were getting into it, although Black Nail didn't think most of them had any idea what was going on. They just liked shouting. The massed energy infected Black Nail and he found himself grinning crazily at the ranks of minions before him as they cheered for their glorious leader. He felt invincible and fulfilled, like a king. Maybe hobgoblins weren't so bad. The noble thirst too. The darkness of night enveloped Black Nail. Off in the murk, insects chirped and an owl hooted forlornly. Black Nail was leaning up against a tree and studying a distant source of light. Through the trees and down a hill, someone had lit a campfire. This was the deep green. Humans didn't camp out here unless they were very brave or very lost. Is that the man you are looking for? Scamp asked. A dozen hobgoblins and 2 humans stood behind Black Nail. It's a little too far away to tell, Black Nail answered disdainfully. What a dumb question. Kida stepped forward. This is the right place. The villagers we asked said he was out here. Although, I guess they could have been lying. They were mucking hostile, like everyone else in this dumb place. Let's go see if it's him, Black Nail said as he began walking forward. Black Nail and his followers had traveled west for weeks to get here. They had come to find one of the few famous bandits that still hadn't allied with Warwick. There weren't many holdouts according to what Black Nail had learned from Luphira, but they were far from Warwick's territory here. It had taken Black Nail a few days to rest after getting back from Dagger Point. He had used that time to study all the changes that had taken place in the goblin camp and to plan for this excursion. There were a lot of new hobgoblins to intimidate and new building to explore. He had also visited shelter and met with Tannen. The villagers had thrown him a feast. They had been grateful for all the gifts he'd brought them from Dagger Point, especially the 2 cows. However, Black Nail had to leave and head east to fulfill the next stage of his plan. After reaching the town of Westwatch, Black Nail's group had resupplied and asked around. The people there had been more than willing to discuss the bandit chief that both raided the area and occasionally sent people to buy supplies there. Humans were weird. However, in the next village they had reached the people hadn't been willing to talk to strangers. They had practically run Elias and Kida out of town. Black Nail had thus been forced to track down the Red Hand himself, and their quarry had proven elusive. What do you want us to do? A hobgoblin asked as he fell in behind his chieftain. Black Nail kept walking. Sneak around and take out any sentries you find, but don't hurt them unless you have to, and don't reveal yourselves. Anyone who gets caught will get a kicking. Yes, boss, the hobgoblin responded as he and several others dashed off into the shadows. Soon, Black Nail reached the bushes at edge of the light. He hid among the leaves as he studied the figures around the fire. There were easily over 30 humans in the camp. Several had set up tents but most of them were sleeping under the outstretched branches of trees. Around half a dozen of them were still awake and moving around, most of whom were sitting around the fire. Black Nail's eyes were drawn to one man in particular. He sat alone, and Black Nail smelled leadership on him. Not with his nose, but with his instincts. It was obvious this man was the boss. Everyone else made sure to give him space, and they kept glancing at him out of the corner of their eyes, as if they were worried he would disapprove of something they were doing. There was no doubt as to the nature of the men in the camp. These were Black Nail's kind of people, bandits. Each of them was armed and they swaggered around like they owned the space they walked through and were daring someone else to say otherwise. In fact, most of them were better armed than Herod's men had been. Black Nail saw several steel breastplates and bits of heavier armor. Black Nail smiled. All right, let's go introduce ourselves, Elias. Everyone else stay here and watch. Elias flinched. What? Why me? Yay, why him? Kida asked. I want to go. Black Nail rolled his eyes. Thankfully, he knew how to handle the young redhead. No, you stay here. I need minions who can fight to cover my escape path. Use your bows if things get violent or if I give the signal. The hobgoblins nodded and the ones with bows readied them. Kida wasn't happy about the orders, but she didn't raise any more objections, and she stayed put with the rest of the hobgoblins when Black Nail and Elias stepped out of the bushes. At first no one in the human camp noticed them, and those that did dismissed them, but then someone realized they were out of place. By this time, Black Nail and Elias were almost to the fire and had passed through half the camp unseen. Wait. Who are you two? A tall man near the fire exclaimed as he jumped to his feet and drew his weapon. Intruders, another bandit asked as he looked up. There was a nervous look on his face. As all the nearby men reacted, Black Nail strode a few feet closer and then came to a stop. The bandit leader calmly leaned back and studied the newcomers. He was of average build and height, but he had a heavy presence. His shoulder-length black hair had been slicked back and his eyes were hard and cold. They reminded Black Nail of Herod's eyes, except they seemed gloomier, and also they were red. That was an unusual color for a human. Black Nail wondered if it meant something. You have a lot of guts to just walk in here, the bandit leader remarked evenly. He didn't seem concerned about their presence or even all that interested. As Elias trembled, Black Nail shrugged. Thanks for the compliment. I came to speak with the leader of these bandits. And what makes you think that we won't just murder you? A bandit asked. Because arrows kill people, Black Nail replied as he signaled to the hobgoblins in the woods with a hand gesture. 2 arrows instantly burst out of the darkness and slammed into the ground beside the fire. Bandits swore and scrambled away from the impact site. Even Elias flinched and he'd known they were coming. I'm not afraid of arrows, the bandit leader observed. Black Nail believed him. He hadn't even flinched. His cold eyes just studied the arrows for a moment and then moved back to Black Nail. So what is it that you want? The leader asked. Black Nail poked Elias' shoulder hard. This was his job. Elias' face was pale as a sheet. He sputtered and then quickly began reciting the speech Black Nail had ordered him to memorize. My master, Black Nail, is a notorious and terrible killer. He is a powerful bandit lord from the east and he demands a meeting of equals, so that he may discuss matters of grave importance with the bandit chief known as the Red Hand. And where is this master of yours? The man known as the Red Hand asked. He looked and sounded annoyed. I'm right here, Black Nail answered. The man frowned and looked the hobgoblin over again. Really? You're a little odd, aren't you? True, a lot of people say things like that about me, some of them even more than once, but it's usually because of my skin color, Black Nail said as he lowered his hood. I think most of them are just jealous of my handsome nose. There was a moment of shocked silence as all the bandits took in Black Nail's face. It was green, and it definitely belonged to a hobgoblin. Hells, what is that? Someone cursed. There was muttering from several more men as they flinched away or reached for weapons. This is a new twist, the leader said as he stood up. None of the other messengers have been hobgoblins. He looked interested now. I'm not anyone's servant or lackey. I'm a leader, Black Nail huffed. I also haven't sent any messengers. A man representing the wolf showed up. I killed him, the black-haired chief replied with cruel smile. Black Nail couldn't help but notice that he had rather long and pointy teeth for a human. Black Nail stood tall and smiled back to show off his own impressive teeth. They were even pointier. Good, I hate that guy. That's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about, killing him together. Also, what should I call you? The Red Hand sounds silly. My name is Sir Illisti Vang. You may address me that way, Hobgoblin. This sudden interest in me from people in the East puzzles me. Why now? Black Nail shrugged. Things are changing. Warwick wants to become king of the north, while everyone in the south is too busy fighting to stop him. Also, there is me. I'm doing some stuff. The silent reaches change little. It has stayed much the same over the centuries. It was set up that way by the original settlers. That's this place? Black Nail asked. He'd never heard that name before. That's what we Westerners call our lands. It is a place of refuge for exiles. We don't much like outsiders, such as you, prying into our business. Well, I'm not here to pry into your embarrassing secrets. I just want to help you make friends, conquer new lands, and kill the wolf. Illisti looked skeptical. Why would I want to ally with you? Are you offering me anything more than vague promises? Ah, a negotiation. Black Nail scratched the side of his head. He didn't have a lot of practice with these, except for the ones where he offered not to kill people in return for material reward. I'm a great ally. You help me and then I'll help you kill your enemies. I'm the most dangerous killer in the world, and I have lots of hobgoblin minions. We could have killed half your men before you knew we were here and then slipped away into the night. And you think I need your help to slay some enemy you imagine I have? Illisti asked as he crossed his across his chest. Black Nail's grin deepened. I know enough about humans to understand that they don't like hanging out in forests with dirty clothes and almost no women around. You're here because you have a powerful enemy. A hint of smile appeared on the man's face. That's a fair enough point. I have lots of points. Now, how can I help you? Who is this man that needs to be murdered? Illisti frowned and rubbed his chin. His posture relaxed as he fell into thought. Warily, Black Nail watched him. The hobgoblin had been smiling and talking freely, but something about the man in front of him put him on edge. His scent was a little off, and he reeked of blood. Without warning, Illisti lunged forward. His blade flew free of his scabbard and sliced toward Black Nail's face. Black Nail jerked backwards and burned a bit of elixir he had ingested back in the forest. The sword's tip barely missed his nose as he drew his own blade. It slid free just in time for him to block Illisti's next attack, however Black Nail was slightly off balance and the strength of the blow knocked him backwards an inch. He grimaced and desperately shifted his weight in preparation for the next blow, but it didn't come. Cautiously, Black Nail held his sword up high in a guard. Not bad. I was expecting worse, Illisti remarked as he took a step back and sheathed his weapon. You're even faster than you look and certainly stronger than your scrawny frame suggests. You're fast for such a fatty, Black Nail hissed back as he lowered his blade slightly. He didn't like being surprise attacked. That was his thing. Illisti smiled. It was a test, nothing more. I wanted to see if you were as formidable as you claimed you were. It was rude, Black Nail replied. So it was. I apologize. It has been a while since I entertained proper guests. All the nearby bandits were on their feet now and several had drawn weapons. Illisti turned to them and motioned them away. Give us some space. I wish to talk to the hobgoblin alone. As you wish, sir, the closest man replied. All the bandits then bowed and hurried away, leaving Black Nail alone with Illisti at the fire, except for a still frozen Elias. Black Nail waved him away, and he ran off into the forest. I believe we were discussing our enemies, Illisti said as he sat back down. You first, Black Nail replied as he also took a seat across the fire. He was still wary. Very well, you were right. I do have a powerful enemy. I was not always a landless exile. In my youth I was heir to my family's ancestral lands, but a powerful neighboring noble stole my birthright. My family's blood-sworn knights fled the castle with me while my father bought them time. And you want me to kill this noble? Much to Black Nail's chagrin, Illisti laughed. You would find that difficult. I don't doubt your might or skill, Black Nail, but my enemy is an ancient vampire. His wounds heal in seconds and he is strong enough to rip a man in half. It is said his gaze can kill, that the darkness obeys him, and that he once killed a troll with his bare hands. That did sound difficult, and it raised some important questions. Black Nail sniffed the air and frowned as an unusual but familiar earthy scent filled his nostrils. He's a mutant, like you. That is a rather unflattering way to describe the hallowed power granted by the ancient blood, but not completely inaccurate, Illisti admitted with shrug of his shoulders. If you don't want my help killing your enemy then what do you want? Black Nail hadn't known that humans could become mutants. Could hobgoblins? Suddenly, he had a lot of questions that need answered. As he leaned back, Illisti sighed dramatically. There is nothing for me here in the West. With what remains of my blood sworn, I have spent years surviving on the fringes while I wait for my blood to grow in strength and for some other noble to grow weak so that I may seize his lands. That hasn't happened, and I grow weary. So? Black Nail asked. He was getting a lot of information he hadn't asked for. In normal times, I would never even think of going east, but your presence suggests an opportunity. My people have remained apart from the eastern kingdoms for good reasons. The cults tend to dislike our existence and your gathering of the wise agrees with them. They are jealous of our power, so they turn the lowborn against us and hunt us, but I don't think they are your allies either. No, I don't like those people much, but it hardly matters. They rarely show up in the north. It's mostly just the farmer type of humans and violent stealing types. Although there aren't a lot of people outside the cities anymore. Yes, which suggests the time is ripe for me to visit and perhaps carve out a place for myself. My kind have long thrived where we can offer our protection to the abandoned and forgotten. Black Nail shrugged. It's what everyone else is doing. Help me kill the wolf and I'll help you take some land. That sounds a profitable basis for an alliance, Illisti remarked with a smile. His eyes had warmed up a little, but they were still dark and brooding. Black Nail agreed with him. It sounded like Illisti's interests aligned with his. Warwick wanted to rule all the north and it didn't sound like the Vimper would ever willingly serve the wolf. There is one thing I should probably mention, Illisti said. As a Vimper I occasionally need to feed on the blood of other men. That sounded inconvenient. Black Nail frowned. You can't just eat animals like everyone else? People don't taste all that good. It's not a matter of taste, but of need. My bite paralyses people, and slowly changes their blood, so that I may return later and feast upon it. More like slurp. Blood isn't a food, it's a liquid, Black Nail mused aloud. The Vimper sighed. I would not tolerate such disrespect from a man, but I have no idea if you are being serious. Black Nail ignored him. This new bit of information did create some problems. He had been looking for a human to serve as a figurehead because humans didn't seem to trust hobgoblins, but a Vimper would also probably not inspire trust. Still, Black Nail had found a useful tool here. He would just have to find some other human to be his puppet. He liked puppets. All right, I will be your guide east, Black Nail said as he looked up. I can explain how things work there and introduce you to some people. I'm also an expert at hiding, so you won't have to worry about the cults or anyone else. Good, then we have a deal. I will help you fight the wolf, Illisti said as he stood up. The Vimper walked over to Black Nail's side and extended an open hand. Black Nail stood up and took it. As they shook hands to seal their agreement, their inhuman eyes met and they both smiled. Black Nail liked Illisti. He seemed like a straightforward guy. The Noble Thirst 3. After Black Nail and Illisti had finished their conversation, the Vimper went to prepare for the journey he had agreed to undertake. Since all his men were glaring suspiciously at Black Nail and none of them looked like great conversationalists anyway, the hobgoblin wandered off into the woods to meet back up with the minions. They were right where he'd left them. Oh, good. You didn't run off into the forest, Black Nail remarked when he saw Elias was with the hobgoblins and Kida. Kida huffed in annoyance. He tired. I grabbed him before he got himself lost. That man was a monster. A Vimper. Elias exclaimed as he stepped forward. He was still pale and shaking. Black Nail put a hand on Elias' shoulder to steady him. What do you know about Vimpirs? They seem like mutant humans to me. An excited gleam appeared in Kida's eyes. Really a Vimper? Those are real. I just said they were. What do you know about them? Black Nail responded. Her sudden enthusiasm was a little unsettling. Just that they're evil, Elias explained darkly. Most people think they're myths from hundreds of years ago. There are lots of tales of evil nobles with strange powers who prey on peasants, or of strangers who arrive in a village and pick the people off one by one. I like the stories about Vimper princes who fall in love with maidens and abduct them so they can be together forever. Usually the woman dies horribly, but it is still romantic. Kida added as she smiled manically. They are terrible monsters that devour people and cause disasters, Elias hissed. They hunt people at night and feed on them like beasts. So, you think they are a lot like hobgoblins, eh? Black Nail replied thoughtfully. A startled look appeared on Elias' face. While Elias tried to figure out what to say, one of the nearby hobgoblins took the opportunity to speak up. So does this mean we won't be attacking them and taking their stuff? They have some nice stuff. No, they are probably our allies now, Black Nail told him. The hobgoblin picked his nose. So, what do you want us to do with the sentries we caught? Black Nail had completely forgotten about them. You better let them go. What about their stuff? Can we keep that? No, give it back. We don't want to upset our new allies. I think one of them is coming over here, another hobgoblin remarked as he stared past Black Nail at the camp behind him. The hobgoblin chieftain turned to see what his minion was talking about, and sure enough there was a human walking out to the edge of the forest. He was easy to see with the fire behind him, and he cast a long shadow. It was a man with a sword at his waist, but he didn't look like Illisti. My lord has sent me to talk to the one known as Black Nail, the man announced formally once he reached the trees. His eyes roamed the darkness in search of the hobgoblins, and he didn't seem afraid of the forest or the hobgoblins within it at all. I'm right here, Black Nail replied as he stepped out of the shadows. He was feeling festive and light-hearted. It wasn't every day that you made an important new ally, and he was glad that coming to this depressing place had turned out to be productive after all. The young man took a second to study the hobgoblin. He was calm, and didn't flinch or look afraid at all. Black Nail found that unflappable demeanor to be annoying. He was used to getting reactions from people. Physically, the young man had short black hair, a clean-shaven face, and a patient look that spoke of a type of discipline most bandits lacked. He was shorter than his master, but he had the same red eyes. You're a mutant too, Black Nail remarked inquisitively. My name is Garen, and I'm a Vimper, not a mutant. To call us such is an insult to our bloodline, and will not be tolerated. How many of you are there? Mutants don't usually get along. In the wild, Black Nail had never encountered more than one mutant in the same place. He'd always assumed they ate each other. I am the only Vimper in service to Lord Vang, and as I said, we are not simple mutants. Ours is an ancient power that stretches back to the first emperors of man. Oh, that sounds impressive. How did you become one? Black Nail asked. He wanted to know what he was dealing with. In my childhood, I was offered up by my village as a sacrifice to my lord's family. However, I survived the offering of life and the ancient blood took root in me. Since the young Lord Vang had no bond servants, I was put into his service, where I have served him loyally ever since, Garen explained. How did you become such as you are? You are an uncommon hobgoblin. Black Nail frowned. No one had ever asked him that before. It was sort of a complicated question. Although, most of it probably wasn't important. I was taken in by a bandit named Cedar to be his helper. He taught me everything I know, like how to fight, but he died, so now I'm trying to get revenge. That covered the important bits. Garen nodded in understanding. Seeking vengeance against the enemies of your slain lord is a true servant's duty. Black Nail nodded along. Also, I'm very angry with them and want to enjoy pulling their tongues out with my claws. Traditionally, I believe grim determination is the appropriate emotion for such tasks, but I don't think anyone has ever actually said you can't have fun doing it. That's good, but those rules probably don't apply to me. Most rules don't. Ah, you might have a point there. Most rules of honor weren't designed with hobgoblins in mind, Garen admitted as he looked thoughtfully to the side. What were you here for, again? Garen looked embarrassed. I apologize. I was momentarily distracted by your unusual demeanor. Plus I look funny, Black Nail added helpfully. If he couldn't scare the man, then he could still catch him off guard in other ways. Garen seemed rather uncertain of what to say now, but he collected himself and determinedly pressed on. I was sent by my master to ask about several of our men who have disappeared. Oh, them. I just gave orders for them to be returned. They should all be fine. That is good. I would hate for our alliance to be marred by the stain or blood. Yay, the smell is hard to get rid of, and you humans bleed everywhere. Yes. Garen replied with careful neutrality. Silently, Black Nail and him stared at each other for several very awkward seconds. The hobgoblin didn't blink. Surprisingly, Kida took this opportunity to walk over and join the conversation. The surprising thing was that she hadn't butted in earlier. So, you're a Vimper? Is that why your eyes are red? Kida asked as she walked up beside Black Nail and beamed happily at Garen. I didn't think you guys were real. Who is this? Garen asked Black Nail. It was subtle, but he was definitely leaning away from the redhead. It was reaction the hobgoblin understood. She's Kida. Someone fed her, so now she follows us around and won't go away. Kida ignored the hobgoblin and focused on Garen. I hear you drink blood. That doesn't sound very appetizing. Does it taste different to you? The taking of life is a sacred activity, that I shall not discuss with you, Garen replied sourly. Kida walked right up to him and looked him over. This caused Garen to look uncomfortable. Apparently, Black Nail wasn't the only one who was used to being feared. Have you ever kidnapped a maiden? Kida asked him. A stiff smile appeared on Garen's lips. Having fulfilled my master's request, I will be leaving now. Bye, Black Nail replied as the man walked out of the shadows and back to the campfire. He wasn't very polite, Kida observed as she watched him go. With nothing else to do, Black Nail and his minions waited in the darkness under the treetop for Elicity to get back to them. It took almost an hour for him to appear at the edge of the light, but when he did, Black Nail went to meet him halfway. I just finished conversing with my subordinates and making plan. There is still lots to do, but I should be able to start heading east before noon tomorrow, Elicity announced as he walked over to Black Nail. How many men do you have? The hobgoblin asked. I have 52 armsmen in my service. I thought you would have more. That's not very many. Quality is more important than quantity, little green monster. I could have more if I wished, but taking care of them would have been difficult. Once I've created a base of operations I can recruit from around my family's old lands. There is no shortage of men there that would join my cause. Black Nail shrugged. You can have both quantity and quality, big pink monster. An amused grin appeared on Elicity's face. He seemed to have a much stronger sense of humor than Garen. We will leave tomorrow, after I send someone to gather supplies from the village. Will they deal with you? They were rather rude to us, and you're a bandit. I'm a Vimper, even though they don't owe me fealty, the people here know better than to aggravate me. The proper respect for the ancient blood has been instilled within them for generations. Being raided by me is practically an honor. Neat. It would nice to buy some supplies before we leave tomorrow. How about you send someone with us? Very well. I'll send Garen with you. You shouldn't have any problems with the villagers then. Alright, that sounds good, Black Nail replied. It also sounded fun. He should bring Kida. Amusement was hard to come by in the green, and not to be wasted. After talking to the Vimper for a few more moments, Black Nail went off to set up his own camp. He didn't fully trust his new allies yet, they had just met, and Illisty's men weren't used to being around hobgoblins anyway. Sharing a camp overnight was thus probably a bad idea, so instead Black Nail selected a spot that was several minutes away. It was a defensible position in a small grassy clearing. They had checked it carefully for mimics before moving in, and found one right at the far edge. However, it was out of the way and mimics didn't move much at night. If they set a watch, the creature probably wouldn't be a problem, and might even act as protection. What do you think of our new friends? Black Nail asked his nearby minions when they had finished scouting the campsite. Around him, hobgoblins were trampling the grass and setting up the fire. Kida shrugged. I don't see why we need their help, but they seem interesting anyway. We could do worse. It is sort of sharp to have Vimpirs on our side. They're Vimpirs. We can't trust them, Elias shot back. They will probably try to creep into our camp during the night and drink our blood while we sleep. Don't worry about that. Several hobgoblins will be watching over you while you rest, Black Nail responded cheerfully. From what I saw, my minions are better rangers and sneakers than the Vampires. The hobgoblins in questions had just finished stomping down most the tall grass. Lurking animals could have used the plants as cover to approach unseen, so they had to be flattened. But you don't know what they can do. They are mutants, Elias replied darkly. Maybe Illisti can turn into mist or put our sentries to sleep with magic. Hey, that's not a bad point, Black Nail admitted reluctantly. He hadn't thought of that. Every mutant that Black Nail had ever fought had used some sort of weird magic. Vampires undoubtedly had one as well. Did they each have different magic abilities or did they all share one? The hobgoblin chieftain turned to look at Kida and Elias. You two have heard of vampires before. Do you know any stories about them using magic like a mutant? Nah, all the myths I've heard give them a whole bunch of abilities, Kida replied. In some, they turn into wolves or bats, and in others they can enslave people's minds. Most of the stories are obvious shit meant to frighten children. Sometimes they can fly or go invisible, Elias added after glancing quickly upwards. He still looked rather spooked. Black Nail didn't see how vampires were worse than any other mutants that lived in the green. They certainly were far from the biggest. By now, the hobgoblins had managed to gather a large stack of wood. They had also managed to get a small fire going, and the flickering light from the flames illuminated the clearing. Shadowy branches reached out from the trees at the edge. Black Nail turned to study the small tree that he knew was actually a mimic lying in wait, but it hadn't moved. Maybe I can trick Illicity or Garen into telling me, Black Nail mused aloud. He was rather smart. They might show their power if they get in a fight, Kida remarked. Black Nail turned to look at Elias. Do you feel like challenging Garen to a duel? If you insult his master I'm sure he would accept. Ha! As if he would need to use some hidden power to beat me. You should do it. You're the only one here who could give him a real challenge. Black Nail frowned. That would probably ruin our alliance, so it wouldn't work. I'm sure we will see them fight before too long, Kida pointed out. Black Nail agreed with her, and since there wasn't much else for them to discuss, he ordered everyone to bed down for the night. As everyone else fell asleep, he took first watch with another hobgoblin. While his minion patrolled the edge of the clearing, Black Nail sat with his back to the fire and stared out at the forest. In the dark, the trees were a mass of shifting shadows. All the talk of mutants had put him on edge, and if anything was going to attack it would probably be during first watch. However, the forest was silent except for the chirping of insects and gentle rustling of leaves. Above the hobgoblin chieftain, the occasional cloud floated across the starry sky and briefly blanketed the moon and stars. Black Nail looked, but he didn't see any vampires flying up there. Off to one side, Kida began snoring. Thankfully, a quick nudge from the toe of Black Nail's boot caused her to roll over and shut up. Now that there was no one else around to distract him, Black Nail began to wonder if he was on the right path. He had a plan to get his revenge, and he was following it, but was that what he really wanted to do? What would Cedar have thought of his actions? Black Nail had no idea. Cedar had been a complex man. He would have wanted Harad to be avenged, but he hadn't been a big fan of unnecessary violence. He had also seemed to care a lot about the people of the North. Black Nail wasn't sure if what he was doing benefited the North the way Cedar had seen it. On one hand, he was about to start a war, but on the other he was making friends and protecting people. As Black Nail stared out into the darkness, he decided to just keep following the plan. He had already started it, and he couldn't honestly think of anything else he wanted to do. Now that Cedar was dead, vengeance was the only force that propelled him forward. Without it he had no purpose. The night grew colder, and Black Nail went to sleep after waking his replacement. Early the next morning, he led his followers back to Illisti's campsite. The Vampire greeted them, and as promised, sent Garen to guide them to the village. They know you're a bandit, right? Kida asked as they walked off the main road and through the entrance of the village. Black Nail followed them with his hood up. There were only a few people visible on the streets of the settlement, noticeably less than you would have seen in an eastern village at this time of day. There were also several other obvious differences. The buildings had a different style, with rounder sides and taller roofs. There were also weird fetishes made from twisted sticks in a lot of doorways and windows. Most of them were circular and braided into intricate web-like patterns. The entire place had an eerie feeling, as if something dangerous was hiding just out of sight, but it looked prosperous. The streets were clean, and the buildings were large and well-maintained. Garen shrugged as he answered Kida's question. They know I am of noble blood and that is all that matters. They fulfill their duties to us and we fulfill ours to them, even if my master doesn't hold these lands. What exactly are your duties? Kida asked. To only suck a few of them dry? To only feast on them when you're really hungry. This earned her a scowl from Garen. We protect them, from everything that would destroy them. Our might keeps both plague and the beasts of the forest at bay, and we rarely feed on villagers. Unless we are wounded or forced to expend ourselves, we can go over a year without having to take a new thrall, and most thralls are taken in battle besides. Two villagers that had been standing down the street noticed the newcomers. They both stiffened, and after a brief conversation, the woman hurried away while the man drew closer. As if they had received some subtle signal, all the other villagers slipped out of sight as well. As Garen and the others stopped in the middle of the road, the man hurried over. He was middle-aged, dressed in a grey robe, and there was a soft cap on his head. He looked like some sort of administrator. He immediately focused all his attention on Garen, and gave him a respectful bow. How may I serve you, Lord? Garen turned to Black Nail. See, acquiring the things you need will be simple. Tell the man what you want, and we will soon be on our way. Yes, it certainly is convenient to be so feared, Black Nail replied. The noble thirst for. Now that Garen was with them in the village, Kida and Black Nail were able to buy food and gear in no time. The middle-aged man that had rushed over to meet them organized everything. Black Nail was sure that he was also trying to get them out of the village as soon as possible and away from the other villagers, but that was fine with him. He was used to behavior like that, although this time they didn't even know he was a hobgoblin. The villagers were worried about Garen, even if they showed him nothing but respect. When they were done shopping, they headed back out into the forest to meet up with the others. Not long after that, Illisti was ready to move. Black Nail's hobgoblins acted as scouts for the Vimper's men and guided them east. Illisti's men had packed their camp up and were transporting it using several horses which Black Nail chose to ignore, and a small cart. Black Nail was fairly sure there were 2 corpses wrapped up in blankets on the cart, but who was he to judge? At the front of the main group, Black Nail walked beside Illisti. Kida, Elias and Garen strode behind them. Both the Vimpirs had horses, but they had chosen to travel on foot with their new allies for now. They were making their way along a dirt road that cut through the forest. At this pace it would take them almost 2 weeks to get back to shelter. The sky overhead was cloudy as they walked, and the wind was still. Most of the road was shaded by long branches that extended out from the forest on either side. The smell of wet earth and growing things hung heavy in the spring air, although the clouds up above were white and fluffy, so it didn't seem like it was going to rain anytime soon. That was good. Rain would have turned the dirt road to mud and slowed them down considerably. Although the walk wasn't too bad, Black Nail was bored so he decided to have a friendly chat with Illisti. What's your favorite way of hunting people? He asked him. Excuse me, the Vimper replied as he gave the hobgoblin a surprised look. You're a Vimper. I'm a hobgoblin. We both hunt people. Everyone says so. I was wondering if you had any tips for me, Black Nail explained. No. Sorry. I'm not some beast out of an eastern folk tale, terrorizing villagers at night. I'm a lord of the ancient blood. I don't hunt my prey. I earn my thralls in combat or they are offered to me by my gracious subjects if I am in need. Well, if you ever want to start hunting people then feel free to ask me for tips. I'm very good at it. I'll keep that in mind, Illisti replied dryly. Just then, a hobgoblin scout slipped out of the trees up ahead. Black Nail watched with interest as the scout jogged over to him. Had the scouts found something? What is it? Black Nail asked. He hoped it was interesting. The hobgoblin gave a little bow before answering. Tracks, boss. They aren't like anything we have seen before, and there are lots of them, everywhere. What kind of tracks? Black Nail's minions weren't all that experienced, so it was possible they were just confused. Weird ones, boss. The feet look small, but they have 3 long claws, and the way the tracks are clustered together makes us think the things have 6 feet. That's a weird number of feet. It is, Black Nail mused. That description didn't sound like anything he'd seen or heard of before, especially if these things traveled in groups. Maybe these creatures only lived in the west? Do you know anything that fits this description? Black Nail asked Illisti. The Vimper frowned thoughtfully and then grimaced. Only one thing comes to mind, and I'm far from an expert on them, boggets. What are those? Black Nail asked. He'd never heard of them, except it sort of sounded like something humans yelled when they stubbed their toes. Come up here and inform our ally, Illisti said as he turned back to look at Garen. Yes, Lord, Garen immediately replied as strode forward to join them. I thought boggets were made up, like how spirits, Kida remarked as she invited herself into the conversation. Up until the last few years, most good people would have agreed with you. Garen admitted. However, that has changed. It all started with a sudden uptake in the disappearance of livestock. At first, harpies and goblins were blamed, but then herders and farmers began to find tracks similar to the ones you described. Hunters and foresters began to notice other things as well, like a sharp decrease in sightings of other creatures in certain areas, particularly goblins. Hey, Black Nail remarked. He didn't like where this was going. Kida shrugged. So, you're just giving the name to some new pest? Has anyone actually seen these things? I've heard that a few bodies have turned up, although I've never met anyone who has seen the beasts themselves. However, the rumors describe insect-like creatures the size of large dogs with twisted bodies and incredibly sharp claws and teeth. They are also supposed to live underground and come up above to hunt. Maybe they hail from the dark paths. Ugh, nasty, Kida remarked as she stuck her tongue out in disgust. How fresh are the tracks? Black Nail asked his scout. He wanted to know if there were any swarms of goblin-eating monsters around. We think they're from yesterday, the hobgoblin replied. Tell the others to be cautious and careful anyway. We don't know much about these boggets, Black Nail said. There was a big difference between hunting goblins and hobgoblins, but maybe boggets were too stupid to realize this for themselves. The scout nodded and hurried off back into the forest. I've never heard of boggets attacking a column of men, so we should be safe, Garen remarked as they watched the scout leave. Yes, and I don't imagine anything will be getting the drop on us with a screen of hobgoblins out there keeping watch, Illisti observed cheerfully. From what I've seen, they are remarkably proficient scouts, as only true creatures of the green can be. Black Nail nodded in agreement. I taught them everything they know. The rest of the journey that day was uneventful. No horde of semi-mythical boggets materialized to attack them. When it began to grow dark, the humans and the hobgoblins set up camp next to each other. Illicit's men were still uncomfortable sleeping right next to hobgoblins, and Black Nail thought it best to keep the hobgoblins out of trouble. However, before everyone started tucking in for the night, Illicity and Garen visited Black Nail's campfire. "Greetings, I just wanted to stop in before took my night's sleep," Illicity said as he walked over. Black Nail, Kida, Elias, and several hobgoblins were seated around the fire. Elias immediately shied away from the vampires, while everyone else greeted them. "We're just sitting here, discussing our favorite foods. Mine is old smelly cheese," Black Nail replied. "You eat food, right? You don't just drink blood, do you?" Garen winced, but Illicity took the questions in stride and answered matter-of-factly. "We eat normal food, yes. The blood of thralls is simply the source of our power. We consume it rarely." "Good. The world is full of tasty things. I would hate to have an ally who couldn't enjoy it. I'll bring you some cheese when we get back. I shall look forward to it." "You really shouldn't," Kida muttered darkly to herself. Illicity seemed to intimidate her in a way Garen didn't, so she didn't usually speak up around him. Black Nail didn't get it. They were both vampires. "You humans usually don't make your food taste strong enough," Black Nail remarked. "I find letting it age a while almost always makes it taste better." Illicity frowned, and Black Nail didn't think it was because of his culinary advice. "We vampires don't really consider ourselves humans, and most men agree with the distinction." "That's silly," Black Nail huffed. "As someone who really isn't human, I know what humans look like. Having red eyes and magic doesn't make you all that different. Mutant wolves are still wolves, and they usually lead wolf packs, sort of like you and your men." The vampire looked uncertain, but then a moment later he nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps you are right. You certainly see the issue from a fresh perspective. Hey, you have given me something unexpected to think about, my unusual green friend." "I like being unexpected," Black Nail replied cheerfully. "It made it easier to take things and stab people. Well, I should get back to my own men. I bid you good night," Illicity told them all before nodding and walking away. Garen stayed until his liege was out of sight, and then he frowned at Black Nail. "He lets you get away with so much. Your inhumanity protects you. You are outside all our social norms, and he doesn't hold your ignorance of them against you. He has killed men for a fraction of the disrespect you show. Plus I'm handsome," Black Nail added. Garen scowled disapprovingly at the hobgoblin, but then Kida leaned closer and smiled at him. The vampire hesitated and then beat a quick retreat. "He's very flighty for a monster from legend," Kida remarked. Black Nail rolled his eyes. "You can annoy anyone or anything." Soon after that, everyone tucked in for the night. Their sleep was uninterrupted by attacks by unknown terrors from the green, and they woke up the next morning ready to continue on their way back to shelter. Sometime after noon, Black Nail found himself leading the main body again while his hobgoblins were out scouting. Garen and Kida were with him, but Illicity was at the back somewhere, and Elias was actually with some of the hobgoblins. He had apparently decided they were less threatening than vampires. The way his mind worked was a mystery. Kida was doing her best to draw Garen into a conversation, while Garen did his stoic best to ignore her. Walking so much was beginning to bore Black Nail. Movement in the forest up ahead drew his attention, but it turned out to just be two hobgoblins. They pushed through the bushes at the edge of the forest and headed over to report to their chieftain. They looked to be in a hurry, so something was probably happening. Black Nail sighed in resignation as he watched them approach. "I sort of miss doing my own scouting, but I'm an important leader now. I don't get to explore the forest and almost nothing exciting happens without someone telling me about it beforehand. I think that's the entire point of having scouts," Garen remarked dryly. Black Nail shrugged. "They are also more people for me to boss around." The lead hobgoblin raised an arm and shouted. "Boss. Trouble. There is a troll lurking about in the forest nearby. It has seen some of the humans and is stalking them now. I'll go get my lord," Garen exclaimed as he ran back toward the other humans. Black Nail watched him go and then turned back to the scout. "It is probably looking for an easy target, so we have a bit of time. Where is Elias?" "He's with the scouts we sent to watch the troll," the scout explained. "Hey," Black Nail remarked. "That didn't sound like something Elias would do. Did you tell him that was where he was going?" "No. We wanted it to be a surprise." "Good job," Black Nail replied as he gave the hobgoblin scout a thumbs up. "I hear we have visitor." Illicity yelled as he ran over with Garen at his side. He was wearing a chainmail shirt with long sleeves and armored boots. "Yes, I was just thinking about how we were going to scare it away," Black Nail replied. "Trolls made him nervous." "Nonsense, it has been too long since my last troll hunt," Illicity countered. "Just point me in its direction and I will kill it." "What?" Black Nail couldn't believe his ears. His jaw hung slightly open, as he turned and gave Illicity an uncomprehending stare. "You want to fight it? For fun?" "Yes, trolls aren't too dangerous for a vampire as long as they don't grow overconfident," Illicity explained as he smiled in anticipation. "I will have my weapons, armor, and men-at-arms with me to contain it and drive it off if I become injured. Troll hunting is traditional for Western lords. It impresses on others their might and power," Garen added. Black Nail shook his head in disbelief. "It works. I'm impressed. Do they not hunt trolls in the east?" Illicity asked curiously. "Not unless they have no choice," Black Nail answered. "I've hunted one with my old master once, but only because it was stalking us and we had to kill it before it killed us. I wish I could have been there, but that was before I joined," Kida remarked wistfully. "At least I will get to see a troll today." I've never seen one before. You don't hunt drakes, do you? Black Nail asked the vampires. That was the only beast more dangerous than trolls that he could think of. Illisti laughed. Ha, no. Even the ancient blood has limits, and being swallowed alive by a giant lizard is one of them. Good, Black Nail remarked in relief. He wasn't planning on going anywhere near a drake anytime soon, and he didn't want a suicidal ally. As they were talking, a squad of a dozen men hurried over. They were carrying various pieces of equipment including armor and several long lances. The men immediately began strapping the armor onto Illisti. When they were done, one of them handed the vampire a steel helmet with a full faceplate and decorative bat wings on the sides. Illisti tucked the helmet under his arm and turned to Black Nail. All right, take me to the troll. It would be shame if it decided to wander off before we got to it. Black Nail looked over at the scouts. The lead one shrugged, so Black Nail sighed and motioned for them to lead the way, which they promptly did. They headed over into the forest at the side of the road, and everyone else followed them, including a dozen of Illisti's men who held long spears. Black Nail noticed that Illisti moved surprisingly quietly considering all the metal he was wearing. He avoided branches and soft earth with ease. It must have been because of his vampire strength and great balance. How strong were vampires? Black Nail had been assuming they weren't much different from vessels, but if they hunted trolls then that might not be the case. He hoped they weren't too strong. He had come here looking for an ally that needed him, not a new rival he didn't understand. The forest was fairly open here next to the road. The trees were tall with rough brown bark, but they had no branches near the ground and there was enough space between them that you could see fairly far. There was also next to no bushes or tall plants to block people's sight. After a few moments of walking, the mixed group of men and hobgoblins encountered another pair of hobgoblins that were warily watching the forest up ahead. They gave the newcomers a quick glance and then turned back to watch the trees. The troll beast is just on the other side of that hill, their guide explained quietly. Good. I'll handle it from here, Illicit remarked with a smile. Hunting trolls isn't complicated. I'll go in first to get its attention, while my men and you surround it. It will focus on me. Do you want us to do anything? Black Nail asked him. Just help out my men if they engage. Otherwise stay out of the way. Garen and my men know what to do. Not a problem. Good luck. Black Nail told him. He was planning on staying as far back possible and seeing what happened. It would at the very least be an interesting show. As everyone watched, Illisti lifted his lance and began walking forward. Garen and his soldiers let him get 20 feet ahead and then fanned out after him in a loose formation. All of them were walking carefully with raised spears, including Garen who held 2 long lances. Black Nail gave them a few seconds and then followed with his minions in tow. Those hobgoblins that had bows readied them, although arrows wouldn't do much against a troll. The only vulnerable spots on trolls were their small eyes, and they didn't hold still so you could line up a shot. Illisti stopped atop the slope, and there was a rustling sound from down below. Black Nail tensed as Illisti began edging forward. The human men-at-arms began spreading out to encircle the target, and the hobgoblin stayed atop the hill so that they could see what was happening. Below, the troll emerged from behind a large tree. The beast was huge, as all trolls were. Standing on 2 legs, it towered over even Illisti, who was very tall himself. Its thick hide was splattered in mud and had tufts of brown hair. Its elongated arms hung almost to the ground, and long black claws sprouted from its thick fingers. It gazed at the vampire before it with beady red eyes that were set below a thick forehead, and boar-like tusks protruded from its lips. All in all, it looked like what it was, an unthinking killing machine. It's a bit of a runt, Illisti remarked in disappointment as he studied it. A thunderous snort exploded out of the beast's nostrils as it stepped towards him. It seemed slightly confused by the vampire's behavior. The human wasn't running and it didn't seem frozen by fear, however that didn't matter too much to the troll. It had only one real reaction to almost every situation anyway, hunt and kill. With startling speed, the troll reached out with its claws and lunged at Illisti. Black Nail held his breath. The noble thirst 5. Branches and leaves were shredded and brushed aside as the troll leapt through the forest at Illisti, and its long deadly claws reached out for him. Killing intent radiated out from the beast. It was unrestrained violence in motion, and it moved almost too quickly for Black Nail to keep track of, but Illisti was ready. In one fluid motion, the vampire stepped to the side and lowered his stance, as he brought up the tip of his lance. The troll's claws missed him by mere inches and caught only empty air, but his weapon sank into the flesh beneath the beast's shoulder, pushing it back. The force of the blow was incredible, but the butt of the lance was set against the earth, and although it shivered, the sturdy weapon did not break. It kept the troll away from Illisti. Roaring savagely in pain, the troll swiped at the vampire with a claw. Its eyes were wide with hate, and its thunderous voice ripped through the forest as its mouth stretched open to reveal countless jagged yellow teeth. Illisti ducked and raised an arm to protect his head. There was a terrible scratching noise as the troll's claws scrapped against his armor. He was knocked slightly back by the force, but he quickly righted himself and kept his balance. The troll hissed as it tried to press forward and snap at Illisti with its jaws, but its body was held back by the rooted lance. In front of the deadly monstrosity, Illisti didn't freeze or hesitate. He was unflinching as he drew a long knife from his waist, and he grunted loudly as he rammed it up under the troll's ribs. It sank up to the hilt, but the troll didn't bleed. Thick green fluid oozed out of the wound for a second and then it dried, sealing the wound. Dumbfounded, Black Nail could only stare at the spectacle. The power of both combatants was unreal. Their might defied belief, and dwarfed that of humans or hobgoblins. One swing of the troll's claws would have sent Black Nail flying, even if he had been wearing armor, and the idea of standing in front of charging troll was ludicrous, but it had appeared to work. The combat didn't let up. Illisti stabbed the troll again with his long knife. Trolls weren't the smartest of creatures, they didn't need to be, but this one knew it had to try something else. Its claws weren't doing much damage to the armored Vimper who was enthusiastically trying to gut it. Eyeing the lance keeping it at bay, it raised a fist and smashed down on the weapon's shaft. The wood splintered, and Illisti jumped backward out of the way. "Lance," he yelled as he raised a hand. Immediately, Garen pressed forward and threw him a new weapon. Illisti caught it and leveled it at the troll. The red-eyed beast wavered as it studied its unexpectedly tough opponent, but it was a predator and it didn't flee from creatures that were so much smaller than itself. Instead, it made a hissing noise like a kettle full of very angry snakes and stepped forward again. The beast moved with new wariness as it slashed at Illisti with a claw, but the Vimper deftly stepped aside and responded with a stab of his lance that forced the troll to back off. Frustrated, the beast swiped at the weapon, but Illisti danced the lance out of the way and then slashed the troll's lead leg. It was a superficial wound, but it annoyed the creature. "It's too cautious. Harry it forward," Illisti yelled as he launched a series of quick stabs that failed to damage the troll but distracted it for several seconds. Immediately, most of the armsmen that had been hanging back behind Illisti rushed out to flank the troll from both sides. Garen led half of them as they circled behind the beast. Once in position, they began stomping their feet and yelling. The troll growled at them but didn't dare turn away from Illisti. However, this new threat unnerved it. It didn't like being surrounded, and it wanted out. Its eyes locked on Illisti as it realized that the Vimper was now standing alone. The green giant roared again and charged forward, with the intent of battering Illisti aside. The Vimper had other plans. He rushed to meet the charge and ruined the beast's angle of attack. Instead of coming at Illisti from an angle, the two combatants hit each other head-on. Illisti ducked under a swipe from the troll and raised his weapon. The troll's bulk barreled forward, and the tip of the weapon sank into its gut. Quick as a snake, Illisti managed to set the butt of his weapon against the earth, and once again the troll's own power drove the lance through its tough hide and into its soft flesh. It shrieked in pain as it tried to back away, and one of its flailing limbs hit Illisti square in the chest. The heavily armored Vimper was sent flying sideways and hit a tree before falling to the ground in a shower of leaves. Watching from a safe distance away, Black Nail winced. Ouch. However, Illisti didn't stay down. Almost immediately he climbed to his feet. The troll had taken a few steps past him, but its injuries obviously pained it and hampered its movements. It walked with a limp, and there were now two lance shafts sticking out of its body. Garen ran over and handed his lord a longsword, and then Illisti began stomping over to the troll. Realizing it couldn't get away, the beast stopped trying to flee and turned to face its challenger. Its voice shook the trees as it roared again, but Illisti kept coming. It slashed at him, but he dodged back and cut at the troll's arms. The creature was definitely moving slower now, while Illisti didn't even seem tired, despite his crash into the tree. The combatants exchanged a flurry of blows, which resulted in the troll gaining a series of small wounds all over its body, all of which instantly closed up, but then the troll stumbled. Halfway through a swing of one of its arms, its back leg gave out. Illisti seized the advantage. He spun around the beast's outstretched arm, and raised his blade up high. With all his power, the Vimper chopped down at the troll's neck. The blade sliced through air and into flesh. There was a wet thud as metal hit bone and cut into it. As Illisti pulled his blade free, the long ragged wound began to fill with green ooze, but that didn't stop the troll from falling. There was another thud as the beast hit the ground face first amid a small cloud of dust. It shuddered a few times and then went still. Was it dead? Black Nail wasn't sure. He was still shocked, and he hadn't seen many dead trolls. Illisti seemed to think he was victorious. He dropped his blade and stepped back away from his fallen opponent. An armed man ran over to pick up his lord's sword, while two others approached and poked the troll's sides with their spears. It didn't move. Taking off his helmet, Illisti turned to give Black Nail a satisfied look. Not a bad hunt. The troll looked a little gaunt, though. Which is strange for a healthy adult. They rarely have trouble hunting in forests such as this. The area must be short on game for some reason. Still, it's a shame I have no hall to hang its head in. It wouldn't be a bad trophy. Black Nail snorted. I'm sure you'll get a haul for yourself eventually. I know some that wouldn't be all that hard for you to take. In fact, if the bout he had just seen was any indication, Black Nail wasn't sure he had ever encountered a building that Illisti couldn't have taken with ease. Illisti grinned. True, but keeping it is the problem. I wouldn't want to live anywhere that I would have to deal with constant attacks by your cults or paladins. They aren't my paladins, Black Nail replied with a roll of his eyes. I've only ever met one, and now that you mention it, I'm not even sure what they're supposed to do. Ah, that's right. I keep forgetting about your unusual upbringing, even if you're an Easterner. The fact that I'm green should remind you, Black Nail pointed out dryly. Ha, yes. However, you can also talk, which sometimes confuses me. Did the paladin by chance survive your meeting? The Vimper asked. He was clearly fishing for information. He'd perked up the moment Black Nail had mentioned meeting a paladin. It was a long time ago. I wasn't allowed to kill him, but we ended up exploding a giant snake together, so it all worked out. Illicity's eyes grew unfocused for a second. Good. I liked it, Black Nail replied with a smug grin. He wasn't going to give too much away without getting anything back in return. The Vimper's men began cleaning up, and Black Nail sent his scouts out to make sure all the noise hadn't attracted anything else dangerous. Trolls were solitary creatures and their presence usually scared most other beasts away, but not everything. It was possible a mutant or a drake would come looking for the source of all the commotion. When they got back to the road and rejoined the others, Black Nail took a moment to think over what he had just witnessed. It was obvious that he'd underestimated his new Vampire ally a lot. Illisti was an incredibly formidable fighter. He was both very fast and far stronger than any vessel Black Nail had ever encountered. He would make a useful ally, but also a terrible rival. Black Nail didn't like being the weaker partner in an alliance. He was supposed to be in charge, but it seemed likely that Illisti would eventually try to assert authority over him. The man was very proud and forceful. The only reason he really needed Black Nail was for his expertise and skill as a guide, and over time that value would slip as Illisti established himself in the east. However, Black Nail didn't have any intention of giving up his position as boss. He would have to take steps to keep Illisti in check and to learn more about him and vampires. They must have some sort of weakness he could exploit. They probably weren't immune to being killed in their sleep, and fire killed almost everything. After Illisti had taken off his armor and everyone involved in the hunt had taken a quick break, the expedition started moving again. Men called out, and the cart creaked as the horse pulling it began walking again. It was still a long way to shelter. Black Nail took up his position at the front of the group while Garen and Illisti kept to the back for a while. It wasn't until the late afternoon that the vampires re-emerged. With Garen in tow, Illisti approached Black Nail. "Greetings. How fare you?" Illisti asked as he walked over. Black Nail rolled his eyes before turning around. "I'm tired of walking and annoyed that I have to keep doing it for days. My feet hurt and the world is too big." "Ah, perhaps. I hope you enjoyed the hunt earlier. You certainly outsmarted that starving troll that my minions found, and it was fun to watch you stab it a lot," Black Nail replied. He was feeling a little surly, but he tried to keep his tone respectful. "Thanks," Illisti responded in a dry tone, while Garen glared at the hobgoblin. "Did you want something else?" Black Nail asked. "Yes, I find you to be an interesting conversationalist, despite your peculiarities, or maybe because of them. Talking with you is always amusing and sometimes surprisingly illuminating. Also, allies should get to know each other." That suited Black Nail's purposes, so he nodded. "What do you want to talk about?" "I know a lot about quite a few interesting things, like all the best mushrooms you can eat." "Ah, I'm curious about the East. I must admit to never having traveled past Westwatch, although I've heard a lot about it. It must be quite different than the West. The people are friendlier, if they don't know you're a hobgoblin, the trees are the same, and there are fewer vampires," Black Nail explained as he began to describe some of the other difference he had noticed. He hadn't seen all that much of the West, but he had noticed a few things. "Oh, and the people in the West smell less like sweat and more like bitter herbs. They must eat a lot of onions," Black Nail finished before asking a question of his own. He thought it was particularly important to describe exactly how everything smelled because humans had such useless noses. "What's it like being a vampire?" Illisti stood up straight and spoke in a reverent tone. "The burden of our responsibilities and power weighs heavy on us, but we have a sworn duty to protect our people." That didn't tell Black Nail anything he wanted to know, although he hadn't expected the vampire to just blurt out his secret weakness. The hobgoblin asked a few more questions but didn't learn anything important, and after talking for several minutes both parties fell silent and concentrated on walking. The next 2 days were rather uneventful, but on the third they neared Westwatch. While everyone else set up camp on a hidden hill in the forest, Black Nail sent Kida and Elias into town to look around. He had been gone a while now, and he had a lot of new faces with him, so he didn't want to run into trouble. Going himself would be riskier since he would have to go in disguise. It would also have required him to walk around, and his feet deserved a break. Black Nail was sitting on a log next to a campfire and wiggling his bare toes to get his blood flowing, when he saw Kida and Elias return. They looked aggravated, which wasn't good and probably meant that they had something bad to tell him. "We have a problem," Kida announced sourly to confirm the hobgoblin's suspicions. Black Nail let his foot drop and sighed. "You never bring me good news. Why do I send you places? That doesn't make sense. I'm not responsible for what I find." "Maybe you should be," Black Nail responded. "He would get more good news that way. Are you going to actually listen to what I found?" "I suppose I'd better. It's my duty as your leader. What did you see in the town? Was it more trolls? A drake? 2 drakes?" Kida glared at Black Nail. "Why would there be a troll or a drake in a town?" "No, it's Warwick's men. They've taken over the place." After listening to what Kida said, Black Nail immediately put his shoes on and went to find Illisti. The vampire needed to hear this. "So, what seems to be the problem?" "We haven't even truly left the west yet," Illisti asked once Black Nail had gotten everyone together. "My enemy Warwick has been moving quickly while I was gone. His men have taken Westwatch, and his troops watch the roads now," Black Nail explained. This news caused Illisti to frown and look thoughtful, while behind him, Garen kept his expression neutral and unreadable. Kida gave the noble a cautious look and then spoke up in a respectful tone. "It's not just here in this town, either. I talked to a bunch of people on the street and everyone is saying that the wolf is taking over everywhere. He has troops in all the important towns and villages, and he is even collecting dues now. No one is doing anything to stop him," Elias added. "They've all just rolled over like dogs. The bastard is actually doing it. He is setting himself up as some sort of king. That is upsetting, and not just because of the consequences to the plans we discussed," Illisti remarked carefully. There has always been an unspoken agreement about this place, that no one would claim it. Thus, your cults and lords have touched it only lightly, and those of the ancient blood have avoided it. Westwatch has always served as a buffer between lands. Kida shrugged. I guess no one told Warwick that, and technically he is still just a bandit, even if everyone works for him and he also wants to be king. He probably sees no reason not to take it like every other town. Illisti nodded. Such is the way of tyrants, however, his ignorance is not an excuse. There will be repercussions for this action. Like what? Blacknail asked. He didn't get it. From what he'd heard, the western nobles didn't exactly get along with each other, or even talk all that much. A powerful noble might attempt to conquer the town and wrest it from this Warwick, while claiming it was self-defense, and his peers may look the other way now. They would have quickly acted to remove him before, so that he wouldn't draw too much attention to the presence of the ancient blood. Hey, are you thinking of giving it a shot? Kit asked. Illisti chuckled dryly. Maybe, but not anytime soon. I don't have the forces to hold such a prize as of this moment, to say nothing of placating the populace. So, what are you planning on doing about all this? Kida asked Blacknail. You're the boss. The hobgoblin chieftain scratched his nose and began thinking. We could probably slip past their patrols on the road, after killing only a few of them. Illisti coughed politely to get everyone's attention. But then we would have to worry about their presence behind us, and whether or not they can get a message out. It is possible they might coordinate and set up a blockade in front of us. Blacknail shrugged. I can lead us around any other humans that show up. I'd rather not waste time running and hiding. It is not in my nature, Illisti replied. This Warwick has overextended himself here. He obviously doesn't expect a creditable challenge to emerge, and his position seems weak. I believe the best move would be to smash his local forces, and then move on with our rear secure. My men can easily handle the troops the young woman saw within the city. Sure, we could do that, Blacknail agreed. It sounded like Illicit's men would be doing all the hard work anyway. There is one thing I didn't mention, but probably should if we're going to start a brawl, Kida added. Rumor has it that Wolfie's men have 2 combat mages with them. Illisti frowned. Wise men? I don't know much about them, or their capabilities in combat. In the West, they are considered dangerous and their powers are shunned by both the nobles and the common folk. Smart, Elias huffed quietly to himself as he gave the Vimpir a critical look. He obviously wondered why they tolerated Vimpirs. Mages blow stuff up a lot. They point their staff at you and then boom. Fire or lightning shoots out and you die, Blacknail explained before reciting some of his more exciting experiences fighting mages. It was kind of weird that he had done it so many times. Illicity listened patiently before speaking up again. It sounds like my plan is still viable, with some alterations and a little aid from the hobgoblins. Blacknail licked his lips and smiled eagerly. Yes, let's sack a city. I've always wanted to do that. Warwick had made his move, so now Blacknail needed to make one of his own. The people of the north only obeyed Warwick because they were afraid of him, however they would soon learn that the wolf was far from the most terrifying warrior around. It was time for Blacknail to announce his glorious self to the world. Joy! He could already taste the blood and ash. The noble thirst 6. The walls of Westwatch lay before Blacknail. They were twice a man's height and constructed of irregular rocks being held in place by gritty grey mortar. The materials had undoubtedly been taken from the rocky hills that surrounded the town. Like most human walls in the north, this one had been constructed primarily to keep dangerous wildlife out. Bears, wolves, and even trolls would have a hard time getting through or over it, which undoubtedly made the people within feel much safer. The wall also helped keep unwanted people from getting into the town, but not reliably. It could be scaled by a determined invader since most of its length wasn't watched, and it was barely a barrier at all for Blacknail and his hobgoblins. Most of them had already climbed over it. Their light bodies and sharp claws made them excellent climbers, especially if they took off their boots so that they could use their sharp toenails. The noonday sun was almost completely overhead, as Blacknail jumped down off the wall and onto the ground inside. He was now in a dirty alley, and there were rough-looking houses with thatch roofs to either side. As his minions gathered behind him, Blacknail pulled up his hood and rearranged his clothes to complete his disguise and cover his skin. His minions did likewise, and once everyone was ready, the hobgoblins began to move carefully deeper into the city. With wary anticipation, the hobgoblins crept through the back alleys and toward their goal, the city gates. Blacknail had infiltrated the city and scouted out the place earlier in the day, so he knew where to go and the best way to get there undetected. There was a guard tower next to the gate that was always occupied by at least one sentry and several guards. That meant attacking it directly would be a difficult. Luckily, there were several spots along the wall that were unwatched, like the one that Blacknail and his minions had just climbed over. There were a few people on the streets, but the hobgoblins easily avoided them. The city was nervous and on edge. The occupation by Warwick's men was recent and the townsfolk hadn't had time to get used to it. This worked in Blacknail's advantage in some ways, though. Few people would be rushing to report suspicious activity to the occupiers. Blacknail leaned out from behind the corner of a building to study a structure across the street. It was a long 2-story building made of brick and stone. It was surrounded by an old low stone wall that looked like it was being worked on and shored up, although there were no workers present right now. This was the place that Warwick's men had taken as their headquarters in Westwatch. It was both defensible and just down the street from the city gates. Blacknail studied it for a few moments, but he didn't see any activity at the windows or anyone outside, so he signaled to his minions and they continued on. The hobgoblins hurried down the road and passed an abandoned cart, before darting back into an alley where they could look out at the gate. There was a simple guard tower next to a double wooden door that could be swung shut to block the way into the city. There were several armed men loitering around near the bottom of the tower. As Black Nail watched, a man on horseback approached from outside. One of the guards walked over to talk to him, and then waved him inside a moment later. None of the other guards did more than look over briefly. Most of them were leaning up against the wall or standing around lazily. They didn't seem that organized or motivated, which was what Black Nail expected from Warwick's men. They had all probably been deserters and bandits not too long ago. After taking a moment to go over the plan in his head again and make sure he had it right, Black Nail looked back over his shoulder. There were 24 hobgoblins behind him, and all of them looked ready to go. Most of them were grinning in anticipation and licking their lips. Their prey lay ahead, and they had been promised blood and loot. Hobgoblins were simple creatures. That was all they wanted from life, and Black Nail didn't mind giving it to them. "It's time to wet your teeth and blades with red, but remember the plan," Black Nail said as he gave them all a harsh glare. "Sow chaos and take out any armed humans you see, but be ready to regroup on the signal. If you run off or get lost then you will be left behind, and you will get a kicking from me if you somehow survive, which is unlikely." "Yes, boss," several of the hobgoblins instantly replied. Some of them also threw him sloppy salutes. The others just nodded and grinned in delight. Black Nail wasn't convinced that they would obey. Sighing to himself, he pulled out a vial of elixir and took a swig from it. He then charged across the road, as his minions fell in behind him. They raced toward the unsuspecting guards, most of whom were looking out in the wrong direction, since they assumed any attack would come from outside the city. It wasn't until Black Nail was within 30 feet of them that someone raised the alarm. A guard near the wall had turned to look in their direction and seen them. "Watch out. I think we're under attack from within," the man yelled to his companions as he drew his sword. The other guards reacted quickly, despite their surprise. They drew their weapons as they spun around. 6 of them clustered together, and they stepped forward to form a line and buy time for their allies. Black Nail swerved to meet them, as he drew his own weapon. Right before meeting the enemy, he burned a bit of elixir and sped up ahead of his minions. Power flared throughout his body and carried him forward. Air flowed around him and pulled his hood back, as he slammed into the guards. He laughed manically, and his blade flashed as he hacked at the lead guard's exposed arm. The man screamed and stumbled back as his flesh was cut and blood spurted out. Black Nail's speed and fury had shocked them. "It's a hobgoblin." "They all are," one of the men yelled. He sounded shocked and more than a little scared, which excited Black Nail. "By the gods, you're right," another guard at the back of the group facing the hobgoblins shouted in response. He was so terrified that his voice broke, and he stumbled backwards. Sensing their sweet fear, Black Nail redoubled his assault. He didn't need the strange magical sense that he'd gained to know that fear was slowing the men's responses, but he used it. As he batted aside a shaky blade, Black Nail reached out with his magic and touched his prey's minds. He could sense the glowing fear in their minds, and it was simple for him to feed that spark and make it grow into a fire. Ducking under an off-balance slash at his head, Black Nail stabbed the attacker in the gut and then quickly withdrew his blade. The man spat up blood and fell. Swirling about, Black Nail blocked another slash and kicked the swordsman in the groin. There was a satisfying crunch and the man squeaked shrilly as he rose up an inch into the air. Black Nail was already turning to deal with his next target, and then his hobgoblin minions crashed into the guards. Frozen in fear and with Black Nail running amok in their midst, they were cut down like wheat by the wave of hobgoblins. Another large group of about half a dozen guards had formed beneath the sentry tower. After finishing off a fallen guard by slashing his neck, Black Nail stalked over to confront them. He wanted to keep fighting. The scent of blood saturated the air, and it filled Black Nail with red-hot energy, mixing with the power of the elixir that pumped through his veins, driving him forward. He needed to fight and dance upon the corpses of his vanquished foes. What joy that would bring! Hesitantly, a guard with a spear stepped forward and stabbed at Black Nail. The hobgoblin grinned as he danced aside and then lunged forward with his blade raised high. He slashed down, and the terrified guard jumped back. The guard hit the man behind him and they both fell in a pile. Black Nail took this opportunity to unleash a flurry of blows upon all the other assembled guards. His sword knocked blades aside and cut through flesh, until several other hobgoblins joined him in cutting down the last few survivors. When the final one was dead, Black Nail took a deep breath to calm his fury and looked around. It was probably time for him to do boss things, so he needed to keep his head clear. There were no guards left standing anywhere in sight, although there were corpses piled everywhere, including one that belonged to a hobgoblin. One of his arms had been mangled and hung loose. The cut must have hit a vein because the hobgoblin lay in a pool of his own blood. Black Nail scowled at the corpse for a moment and then moved on. He could afford to lose minions, and it hadn't been anyone important. In fact, Black Nail had found the dead hobgoblin to be one of his more annoying minions. If he had been better at life he would still be alive now, but he hadn't been, so his death wasn't Black Nail's fault. Just then, there was a stomping of boots. Black Nail looked up in alarm, in case it was enemy reinforcements, but he quickly realized the noise was coming from the wrong direction. The stomping sound was rising from outside the gate, which meant it was probably allies. Indeed, when Black Nail looked over, he saw Illisti leading a formation of troops inside the city. The Vimper was fully armored in chain and plate, but he was wearing a new helm. Unlike the one he had worn when facing the troll, this one was open at the front so that his mouth was visible, even if his nose and eyes were protected. Behind the Vimper's men came Kita and Elias. "Ha, I see everything is going well so far," You've secured the gate for us without any problems. That speaks well of your capability, Illisti remarked as he walked over to Black Nail's side. He sounded excited. Yes, but that's the easy part, Black Nail replied. Now you need to hold the gate. The Vampire turned to study the city. We can handle it. Have you seen any sign of the wise men? Black Nail shook his head. No, they must be hiding, but if they show themselves I will deal with them, as I promised I would. Mages die easily enough if you do it right. Make sure of it, Illisti replied grimly. For all his supposed confidence, he sounded a little fearful of the mages. I will. Just hold the gate and wait, Black Nail told him before turning and walking back to his minions. I'm going with you, Kida yelled as she ran after him. Black Nail sighed but didn't try to dissuade her. He was busy, and it wasn't worth the effort. At this point, most the hobgoblins were either watching Illisti's men or looting the fallen guards. However, they had all been keeping an eye on their leader and formed up when he yelled to get their attention. They knew they would get a kicking if they ignored him or looked inattentive. Black Nail pointed to a pair of hobgoblins. You two stay with me. The rest of you, start setting fires and chasing people, but don't go far and watch for the signals. You all know the plan. Follow it. The hobgoblins nodded and did as they were told. Most of them had already dropped their hoods, but those that hadn't did so now. For this next part of the action, Black Nail wanted everyone to know who was attacking. It was time to make sure everyone heard of Black Nail the Hobgoblin and his tribe of savage killers. Word of his might and ability to fight Warwick needed to spread throughout the north. The hobgoblins had orders to spread out and sow chaos, and that's what they did. The hobgoblins ran down the streets and began busting through windows and ransacking everything in sight. There were screams as people inside the nearby homes saw them. Sweet, I'm getting in on this, Kida shouted as she ran over to join them. Black Nail sighed again, but let her go. The town was apparently going to be raided by a bunch of hobgoblins and one young red-headed woman. Whatever. He didn't want to look after her anyway. Black Nail led the minions he had selected over towards the enemy base. The streets were completely empty now. Shouts from the fighting and bystanders who had ran off had alerted the city that someone was attacking the gate. The townsfolk had reacted by withdrawing into their homes and hoping whatever was happening passed them by. However, Black Nail did see several people peek out at him from nearby windows. He ignored them, and led his minions to a two-story home he had picked out earlier. Black Nail kicked the door open and stormed inside. There was a brief scuffle as they subdued the surprised man inside, but then they left his unconscious body behind and headed upstairs. Up there, Black Nail walked over to a bedroom window and looked out. He could see both the enemy base and all the streets around it clearly. The walled compound that Warwick's men had taken as their own was buzzing with activity now. Dozens of men were running in and out, and a mob was forming up in the courtyard out front. They already outnumbered Illisti's troops, and more men were still joining them, but that was Illisti's problem. Black Nail ignored them and looked for any sign of the mages. Dealing with them was his mission, however he didn't see anyone holding a staff or displaying any other signs that they were mages. Everyone he could see looked like thugs or soldiers. Patiently, Black Nail watched for several minutes as the soldiers finished assembling and headed off to the gate, but neither of the mages showed themselves. A few moments later, the sound of fighting reached Black Nail's ears, but he couldn't see what was going at the gate from his vantage point. He didn't hear any explosions though, so Illisti was probably fine. If he could handle a troll he could deal with some normal human soldiers. Just as he was about to give up and retreat, Black Nail spotted movement in the compound. A small squad of soldiers rushed out and began running to the gate. In their midst was a man holding a long staff. Black Nail grinned. There he is. The guy you want to kill, a hobgoblin asked as he perked up and looked over Black Nail's shoulder. There wasn't enough room at the window for everyone, and hobgoblins got bored easily, so they had found ways to distract themselves. One hobgoblin had been sleeping on the bed, and the other had carried the unconscious man upstairs and had been poking him in the hope that he would wake up, so he could knock him unconscious again. Yes, we're going to kill him, Black Nail replied as he rushed out of the room. Yeah, the hobgoblins exclaimed as they followed after him. The group of soldiers with the mage had already passed by the house, so Black Nail slipped out the front door and quickly followed them. The street was empty except for the mage's guards. Get your bows ready, told his minions as he readied his own. The best way to kill mages was from afar, before they saw you coming. It was easier not to die in a fiery explosion that way. Release all together at my command, Black Nail ordered the hobgoblins when they all had their bows in hand. Go. One of the guards heard something and turned to look, but it was too late. 4 arrows zoomed through the air towards the mage's exposed back. 2 of them missed completely, but the others passed through the soldiers and slammed into the mage. As the mage dropped his staff and fell, his guards spun around. Now we leave, Black Nail remarked as he dashed away at top speed. He could probably finish the soldiers himself, but that wasn't his job, and he needed to keep an eye out for the other mage. After them, one of the soldiers yelled. Instead of going back to the house, Black Nail slipped into an alley and headed for the gate. It was time to check on the fight there, and he wanted to make sure that the second mage hadn't somehow slipped by him. With the dead mage's guards in pursuit, Black Nail and his minions zipped through a maze of alleys and then scrambled up a drain pipe and over a wall. There was cursing from behind him as the guards were forced to stop in front of the barrier. Ignoring them, Black Nail led the way down another alley. There was a pile of barrels there he used as a springboard so that he could jump up and reach the roof. Pulling himself up, he crouched on the roof and surveyed the fight happening at the gate. Illicity's men were still outnumbered but they were holding their ground. They had formed up into a bent line formation right in front of the gate, with Illisti himself at the front. The Vimper was cutting down enemy soldiers left and right as Warwick's men tried to push him and his men outside the city. They weren't having much luck. Down the street, a few buildings were starting to catch fire, and Black Nail saw two hobgoblins chase a man down the road. "Can we join in the fun?" a hobgoblin asked as he crouched down beside Black Nail. "I want to find some shiny trophies to take." "Fine, let's go," Black Nail responded. He had no idea where the other mage was, but Illisti didn't look like he needed any help. The men attacking him were like water splashing against a rock. As Black Nail watched, Illisti grabbed an enemy swordsman, picked him up, and bit his neck before throwing him aside. Yay, it was time for Black Nail to start rounding up his minions. Also, he needed to go look for Kita. Knowing her, she was probably doing something stupid that would ruin all his plans if he didn't stop her. Interlude, a singular purpose. A skittering sound echoed out from every direction. It wasn't that loud, but the sound bounced eerily through the dark confines of the tunnel. Unfazed, the Watcher waited patiently in the darkness as the noise grew louder. Soon it would complete the mission that it had been commanded to fulfill, and service to the host was all. It was a warrior and the purpose of life was obedience. The cave around the warrior was dark and dank. The only sources of light were small glowing mushrooms that grew in clumps on the ground and from the walls, but that was enough for the warrior. Its 4 eyes shimmered as they drank up all the light, and they allowed the warrior to see the shiny harvester beetles that were tending to the nearby mushrooms. A few moments later, a mob of shadowy figures emerged from a side passage. The mass of skinny limbs and dark carapace came to stop before the Watcher, and the skittering sound died down. The new arrivals were short. They didn't even come up to the Watcher's shoulders. One of the creatures stepped forward and began making a strange mix of hisses and clicks. It was a member of the host's worker caste. The warrior listened and then replied in a similar way. When he was done, the lead worker bowed, and the warrior began to return the way he had come. The tunnel was once again full of the sound of claws scrapping against stone as the workers followed him. They passed several small harvester plantations, which they left alone out of respect. The mounds were built from piles of organic mass gathered from the depths and above ground. They were covered in many different types of mushrooms, some of which glowed or glimmered different colors. Sometimes shapes that were much larger than harvesters moved among the fungi, but the shadowy creatures all avoided or fled from the travelers. Clusters of stalactites hung from the ceilings, and occasionally drops of water dripped down from them to splash against the stone floor. The mob of skittering creatures moved past it all unimpeded. Soon, they emerged into a circular cavern that was illuminated by a dull light. Across the chamber stood 2 more warriors, who were guarding the far passage. Both the warriors were armored in thick black carapace, had 4 shining eyes, and sharp mandibles protruding from their mouths. Like the workers, they had 6 legs, but they were standing on 4 of them. Using their top pair of limbs, one of the warriors held a long spear, while the other held a tall staff. Both the staff and the spear were made from a bone-white material that was twisted and looked like it had been grown instead of crafted. The top of the staff held a glowing white crystal, which was the source of the dim light that filled the cave. After a brief nod of acknowledgement from the guards, the newly arrived warrior led his worker charges into the passage beyond them. They came out into a huge cavern that had a high roof and was hundreds of feet across. An underground river flowed through the middle of it, filling the chamber with a gentle lapping sound. Around the river, dozens of workers were busy with varied tasks. Using their claws, they tended to the heaps of dirt and refuse they had collected. Like giant harvesters, the workers built and rooted through the piles. However, they weren't growing mushrooms. There were very little fungi in sight. Instead, the workers seemed to be reaching inside the piles and extracting something. Claws emerged from dark rotting soil with long white filaments clutched within them. The thin shapes squirmed and flailed about in the air as the beetle-like workers gathered them. They were worms. The entire cavern was a farm for huge white worms. The warrior was undaunted by the sight, although it made his stomach rumble slightly from hunger. His mandibles clicked softly as he thought about the sweet taste of slimy worm flesh, but he banished the thought. He had a duty to fulfill, and there was no time to consider anything else. He had been trained well, and he would eat his fill later. There was more than enough food for all the servants of the host. Under the leadership of the noble caste, the host had greatly expanded its agricultural operations, so that the next grand spawning could be the biggest ever. The host's numbers were growing in leaps and bounds, as was their destiny. Soon. At this point, most of the workers that had been following the warrior walked off to seek their next task. Only their leader kept shadowing the warrior and following behind him. Together, they passed through several more caverns. Some of them were farms of various sizes that teams of workers were taking care of. Eventually, they entered an incredibly large cavern. The distant walls were veiled by darkness that seemed to stretch on forever, and the roof hung hundreds of feet overhead. Hundreds of towers made of some sort of dark resin-like material stretched from the floor to the ceiling, and similarly constructed walkways and bridges connected the buildings. All throughout the darkness little pinpricks of white light glowed softly, like stars in the night sky. A nearby light post revealed the source of the dull illumination. There was a small monocrystal sitting atop it. A steady chorus of whispering and tapping echoed through the cavern. The dim light glinted off countless black carapaces as workers and warriors scurried along the bridges and ramps that led in every direction. The darkness here flowed and roiled with the gathered creatures' endless obscured movements. The warrior and the worker submerged themselves into the flow of their kind, as they headed to a ramp that twisted its way up one of the largest towers. They ascended the incline, and when they were halfway to the ceiling, they entered the tower through a gaping irregular entrance in the resin. It was quiet and completely dark within the room, and after stepping inside both of them stood at attention and waited. From the impenetrable darkness, 2 large creatures emerged. They were as tall as the warrior but with thicker builds. Their bellies were rounder and the armor at back of their heads was longer and covered with ridges, although they had the same general shape and black carapace. With a series of clicks and raspy grunts they addressed the warrior and the worker. These were administrators, the highest servants of the nobility, and their words were not to be questioned. When they were done talking, the warrior responded. He told them all about what the scouts had discovered above ground and the feed they had brought back with them. Of particular importance was their observations of the humans, the ancient invaders. The nobility and the administrators wanted to map out the location of as many human settlements as possible. The resurgence was coming, and the host would soon reclaim what had once been theirs. The exile had been long ago and they were no longer what they had once been, they were now the host. Their weaknesses had been stripped from them during their retreat into the darkness below. The deep places and its beasts had tried to devour them, but they had devoured them instead. The exiles had learned much and taken their enemy's strength as their own. Under the divine guidance of the nobility, the castes had been formed, and the host had been forged into a single will with a single purpose. Soon,